Now when Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu was preaching, people were coming to him and listening. And sometimes they would listen. Like in the case of one man, Abdul Rahman ibn Auf. He had already rejected idols. And so when he heard this message, he knew it was the truth. Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu, who in the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, just before the first revelation, had made an oath with Abu Bakr that they would not fornicate, that they would not worship idols, and that they wouldn't take intoxicants. So these were people that were Muslim before the revelation had come. They are called Hunafa, the people of true faith. Others include Zayd ibn Amr ibn Nufayl, the Waraqa ibn Nawfal, and others. Now there were some 6 people that just through Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, just through his efforts, and people coming and speaking with him, came into the religion. One of them was born 15 years before that date. His name was Az-Zubair ibn Al-Awwam. Az-Zubair ibn Al-Awwam was born 15 years before that date where he'd find himself at the place of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. His mother's name was Safiya bint Abdul Muttalib. Safiya bint Abdul Muttalib was one of the aunties, one of the 4 aunts of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His father is Al-Awwam ibn Khuwaylid, which means that there's some lineage shared between him and Khadija bint Khuwaylid. Az-Zubayr grew up within a family of merchants and traded as a youth. His main preoccupation was with poetry. Poetry that had to do with the Arabs in the era of Jahiliyyah, the age of ignorance. Poetry, horsemanship, camelleering. Those were his 3 main passions. Poetry he held as important because by knowing poetry, you're able to transmit and preserve the knowledge of the Arabs. So people would memorize generation after generation after generation to know the lineage of the Arabs. And to this day, when you look at certain tribes that have memorized, even though they've written it down now, they make it a point to memorize in rhyming poetry who they're related to. Some of the Arabs can go all the way back to Ismail. Their lineage is that uninterrupted. Most Arabs can probably do that. It's also important because lineage and knowledge of poetry back then was a currency that showed that one was literate. Because Az-Zubair ibn Al-Awwam was literate. And so people, when they would gather together for the Uqad fair, the Uqad fair was the equivalent of what you would find in the 1980s and the 1990s at concert halls, where you would find young men reciting over beats, over drums, kick, jump, snare, and 808. You'd find 16, 17, 18-year-old men battling. And the best of those would have his words recorded onto a cassette. And that cassette would be distributed around on mixtapes throughout parties throughout the West Coast. These were called the hip-hop battles of the 80s and the 90s. In the time of the Uqad fair, with the Uqad fair, those battles of what we now call hip-hop, or those poetic statements being made over kick drum beats, back then were used over merely the drums of the deaf, or the duff, and the statements. And whoever had the best poetry, it would be hung inside of the Kaaba. At that time, the best poetry coming from Ibn Qais was the Sab'a Mu'allaqat, the 7 hanging verses, because they were hung inside, and no one at that point had yet been able to defeat Ibn Qais in a flat-out battle of verses. He was the undisputed king of the verse battles. And people would gather from miles around to listen to the Arabs battle over who had the most camels, who had the most money, who had the best parties, where the parties were at, who had the most cash, who was the toughest. And these things haven't changed today. But back then, it was all about how much gold, real gold, someone had in their possession. How much property they had, how many houses they had, how many tents they had, how many wives they had, the size of their tribe or their crew. All of these things played out within the Arab psyche. And Az-Zubair ibn Al-Awwam was party to this, watching, contributing at times, showing that he had a keen knowledge of these matters. There was another one with him at that time, Talha ibn Ubaydullah, who used to listen as well. Although he wouldn't contribute, he was more into archery. Az-Zubair, with his knowledge, then went into the science of camelleering, so people could study because of all the different breeds of camel. Generally, many of us may only know of the dromedary, which has one home, and the Bactrian, which has two homes. But within the dromedary camel, you have the gray camel, you have the red camel, you have the yellow, you have the stud, you have the burnous, you have all these different types of camels. And some are faster than others. The red camels were the fastest and the most valuable. And the gray were the most rare, so they were very expensive. So one out of every 500 camels would deliver the gray camel, the fluffy hair, small stock, almost what they call miniature ponies for horses. So people wanted to buy these for just notoriety's sake. And so Az-Zubair would recite and note out the lineages of the different camels and the different the Arabian horse breeds, which now people will really pay a lot of money for the Arab horses because they know that how strong their lineage is. Horses with lineages that go back hundreds of years. Not people, horses. Camels with lineages that go back hundreds of years. You have people here today, they don't know who their grandparents are. Never mind the horse. These people don't even know who their grandparents are. And they're a bit shaky who their parents are. So Az-Zubair wrote out all these things. And so when people came to buy a good camel or a good horse from him, he would charge them based upon the lineage. This camel has seen this many raids. It's been on this many expeditions. Look at it. And they would check the leather padding on the knees, see if there were any defects in it. How long can it go without water? Well, this one can do 20 days without water. This one can do 40 days without water. This one has been in this many riding campaigns. This one, he's delivered this many children successfully. He had all these different principles. And then within the camels, you had the riding camels and the pack camels. Males were the pack camels. You don't ride male camels, they'll kill you. They're pack camels. The females get killed. And then he could tell you of all the different types, which ones were the most suitable for battle and raiding. And this carried on in his life. He made a good living. And when he turned 15 years of age, he heard through a colleague of his, Talha ibn Ubaydullah, that there was a man that he should come and pay a visit to. Az-Zubair, because he'd been best friends with Talha, trusted Talha's judgment and stated that he would go visit this man. Under the instructions and direction of Talha ibn Ubaydullah, Az-Zubair came to the market and met a tall man, brown, ruddy skin, with a long white beard and a strong gaze, who wanted to talk to him about Islam. A word that Az-Zubair had never even heard. He'd never heard this expression. And this man introduced himself as Abu Bakr ibn Abi Quhafa. He explained to him that the era had come. The end of days was near. The day of resurrection was as close as the gap between the two fingers when you put them together, the index in the middle.